y'all, it's Kara. Today we have a little May reading wrap up, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and rank all of these books from my least favorite to my most favorite of the month, just like I did for my March and April wrap up, because that is actually one of my favorite videos that I've ever made and edited and put up on my channel. I don't know, I really love how it turned out, and I had so much fun ranking all of these books. Just like I said in that video though, I'm gonna go ahead and put it up front at the front of this video that I really love books. I really love speaking positively about them, but at the same time, recently I've realized that it is important for me to be critical when there are things that I don't necessarily love. So I just don't want to make it look like I am bashing these books. I'm not having fun, like being mean, but there are some books that I read, especially this month, that I really did not enjoy, and they weren't for me personally. I just want to be critical. Okay, I'm gonna get out of that. So I read 7 books in May. Of the 7, 5 of them were physical books, 1 was an audio book, and 1 was an ebook. But when I say that I read 5 physical books, there were quite a few of those books that were audiobook options on Scribd, and towards the end of the month I realized that I hadn't used any of my Scribd credits yet. So instead of like taking the time to listen to something new, I just went ahead and downloaded options that I was already reading physically so that I can get through the books faster and listen to them coming to and from work. And also, like, I really like to listen to audiobooks and read along physically as well. So when those books pop up, I'm going to try to remember to say like, oh, this was an audiobook option on Scribd or something like that. Let me go ahead and scoot over a little bit because I do not have a copy of my least favorite book from May. This was the ebook that I read last month, and it is The Girls' Weekend by Jodi Gehrman, and I gave this book 1 star. I feel really bad about this rating. I mean, I feel confident behind my reasoning. It's a thriller book about this group of women who used to be friends, and then they decide to all reconvene at their rich friend's lake house for a little girls trip together, like a little girls weekend. But once they get there, they have a really wild night, and then when they wake up the next morning, nobody can remember anything, or so they say, and one of the friends is missing. So when I decided to read this book, there were 2 things that really stood out to me. One, you know, the cover, it looks like a lake. It looked like it was gonna be a really fun, fast-paced summertime read, and I'd been looking for some of those. And then 2, the way it was marketed to me made me think it was going to be more of a closed door thriller, like a locked door, what is that called? Like a locked door whodunit mystery, or even something with more of an isolated setting. And arguably, maybe it is. They are in a small town, kind of out of the way, but there's nothing really isolated or a locked door about anything going on in the story. And also, the mystery to me just seemed very low stakes. And also, the characters' decisions throughout the entire book, like from the very beginning all the way throughout the book, their decisions didn't make any sense. And I felt like the author was trying to cover her tracks because she kept writing in these reasonings of like these characters were over explaining why they weren't calling the police, or why they weren't out looking for this woman, or why they didn't want to do anything. And she was like, oh, we can't do that because of this. And it was the same reason over and over again, and it just didn't make any sense to me. And maybe this is me being a little bit sensitive, but I just really felt like there was very poor, unstable mental health representation. Like, when I say poor, I mean borderline negative and harmful, and I didn't like that part of the book. I just felt like it was so unnecessary, and that it was part of this author's plan to try to give each of the characters a very specific personality trait to help the reader distinguish everyone from everyone else. But it's just like, it was so typical. Of course, we're gonna have the token type A rich friend. Like I just said, we're gonna have the person who has a tough history and background with mental health problems. We're gonna have somebody who has a tough past in a different way that I don't want to get into because it's a spoiler. But as I was reading, I just felt like I continued to tick off these boxes, like, yep, okay, we've got this person has this really common problem, and then this trope, and then this thing. Like, it was so boring. I thought the plot was super lackadaisical, like they just weren't doing anything. And then the twists were so lazy. Like I said, heavy-handed stereotypes. I couldn't stand it. So at this point, you may be thinking, if you hated it so much, why did you finish it? Okay, I have an answer for you. First of all, this was a really short book. I was reading it on ebook, so I'm not sure how many pages it has, but I flew through it in 1 afternoon, even though it wasn't fast-paced. And I attribute that to the fact that when this all happens at the beginning of the book, like when everything is set up, it seemed super obvious to me what was going to happen and like what was going on. And it was so obvious, it was almost laughable. So I kept thinking, what if this has like the greatest plot twist and like it's gonna blow my mind? Because I had heard this book has a good twist. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but no, I mean, no, it was. Let's move on to the next book, which I also don't have a copy of because I listened to the audiobook. I checked that out from my library on Libby. It was An Anonymous Girl by Sarah Pekkanen and Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen, that author duo. I'll go ahead and say I gave this book somewhere between 2 and 2.5 stars. It wasn't bad, but it was below average for me, and I'm trying to get to a point where eventually my average rating, like this book was good, you know, that's a 3 star. So I don't feel that way about An Anonymous Girl, so we're gonna settle. I feel good about a 2.5 out of 5 for this one. This is another thriller book, and it's about this makeup artist who is always looking for a way to try to increase her income. So then this opportunity arises for her to partake in this mysterious psychological study. It's really good for her bank account, but at the same time, as she continues to be a participant, the questions in the survey becomes more and more intrusive until she reaches a point where she's thinking, what is the point of all of this? The beginning started off so strong. I was in it. I loved this book. And especially in listening to it on audiobook, when Jessica, who is the main girl, when she first starts going to these studies, the way that it's narrated, especially when it turns into like being from the perspective of the psychiatrist, I can't remember. It was so creepy, like having that voice in my ear, and I loved that whole aspect of the story. I really liked Jessica, and I feel like her character made sense. She was very easy to root for. I just really liked her. And those were pretty much my only thoughts for the first 50-ish% of the book. It was definitely on track to be like a solid 4 star. But then the repetition set in, and I felt like we just kept going over and over and over the same conflict, and every time I thought it was finally resolved, they would throw in this new like minor detail that would like kind of spice it up again, but at the same time I was like, not this again. I was just ready for them to move on to like something darker. I don't know, it's almost like they were trying to hit a word count. It just got to be a lot too long for me, and it wouldn't end. Okay, so moving on, for the rest of the video, these are all going to be 3.5 stars or higher. So from here on out, I did like all of these books, and I would recommend all of these books to you guys too. So let's go ahead and do Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I feel like I just talked about this book in another video, but I can't remember which one. Before I say anything about this book, I want to put it out there that just because this book was not a 5-star read for me, I definitely understand why it is for so many people. I think it's a really important story. I think it's very unique, and even though I say unique, but it is rooted in a really, really sad reality that is a very real problem for not even like youths of today, but just vulnerable women today in society. This book tackles really difficult themes and subjects and content, and I think that Jackson handles everything very gracefully, and I'm really glad. This is a YA thriller, or like I guess it's a thriller. It's a YA contemporary thriller, that's what I'm gonna call it. But I just want to make it so clear that I am so happy that this book, 1, exists, but 2, exists and is targeted towards a younger audience. I wish that I could have read something like this when I was in high school. So this book is about a young singer. Her name is Enchanted, and she really is eager to have a career in music. So then one of the most popular music industry people, he's a fictional character in the book, his name is Corey. He spots her and he invites her to go on tour with him to like open up for him, sing for him, with him, you know what I mean. And at first her parents are like, no, we're not letting you do this, but then she convinces them to let her go. They decide to, and end up almost immediately regretting that decision, because once she gets out on the road with Corey, he is not at all who she thought that he was. And from there, it is a heartbreaking story. So I do want to say, this book was able to move me. It did give me some like of those good visceral reactions, and I was rooting for her so hard to get out of some of these situations where you just want to give her a hug and help Enchanted. You really feel like she is a real person telling her story. There were little chapters here and there that would be from the past, or that would be from the present, but from like her friends or people who knew her or people talking about her. That did start to confuse me just a little bit, but it was nothing to like complain about at that point. So I started this book listening to it on audiobook, but I wasn't able to keep track of what was going on. I was getting very, very, very confused very quickly. So I actually had to start over just reading the book physically, and that went much better for me. I immediately felt like I connected to the story more. I'm not gonna spoil anything, so I'm gonna have to kind of tiptoe around what I had some trouble with, which is hard because a 3.5 sounds harsh, but I can't really tell you why I did that without giving everything away, and I'm not gonna do that. Basically, towards, I wanna say like the halfway point of the book on, every now and then there will be a chapter where the writing is just different, and it's still from Enchanted's perspective, but it's really hard to tell what is going on. Stay with me. So even though throughout most of the book everything is described super clearly and I feel like I am there with Enchanted whether I want to be or not, we will start to have these chapters where I feel like I can't see like anything. I don't know where we are. I don't know who Enchanted is with. Now I do need to credit the Haley Hughes. We were talking about this the other day because she was like, that is a hot take, giving Grown 3.5 stars because she loves it so much, and so much of the book community rightfully does love this book. But I was just talking to her about how like things get really hazy and then difficult to read, and she said that she thought it was a direct reflection of Enchanted's mental state, and I have to 100% agree. I don't think my mind ever like fully formed that thought, but I agree with that completely now that I'm looking back in retrospect. That's exactly what the author was doing. But at the same time, just my opinion, I feel like it could have been executed differently to where as a reader, I know we're supposed to be experiencing how Enchanted is like feeling, but it was so hard for me to read those chapters even though they were just a page or so long. It was so disorienting to me that I felt like I wasn't getting anything from the story there. What I'm trying to say is I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. I just wish that the execution had been different in some way. That's all. And then the other thing is, towards the end of the book, something happens. It's like a very common plot trope or device that typically happens straight up at the beginning of the book, and yet it happens at the very end of this book, and I feel like it was a little rushed. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it would spoil things, but there's something thrown in at the very end of this book that I thought, oh no, why are we doing this right now? And then instead of actually like working through it and like having time to process all those emotions, all of a sudden it's solved. So I didn't understand why we had to have that in the end, and it really was enough to like make this book not stand out to me after finishing it as much as I thought it was going to. Okay, I just need to shut up because I feel like I'm being so negative about this book that I really did enjoy. I just want to make sure that my thoughts are justified and you didn't think I just slapped a 3 on there. No, I really liked this book and I really think that more people should be reading it. Next I have Finlay Donovan is Killing It by El Cazimano. This was another 3.5 star for me, and this was one of the options that I had on audiobook on Scribd, so I would read. I really did prefer reading this one, but the audiobook was fun to listen to driving to work in the morning or like when I'm getting ready, and it made the book fly by a lot faster than I think it would have if I had just been reading it. This is I want to call it a thriller, but it's more like a mystery book, and it actually is the first book in what is going to be a series, so that's really fun. This is all about this author named Finlay Donovan, and Finlay is trying to write another book. She has been, I don't want to say like successful in the past, but she is an established author. She's also a single mother going through post-divorce era of her life. She just has a lot going on right now, and on top of everything, she is in this Panera Bread one day talking about a pitch for what she wants her next book to be, and it's about a hitman or a hit person, and someone overhears her, misunderstands the whole situation, and then comes up with this proposition and says like, I want you to kill my husband. So then from there, things spiral out of control and it was really fun to read. This is gonna be a super short review because I don't have that many thoughts about this book. I really thoroughly enjoyed my time while I was reading it, but since I've closed the book, I can't say I've been thinking about it at all. I am interested to continue with the series because this book ends on a wild cliffhanger, but it just didn't have that graphic nature that I usually would look for in a thriller. And again, it's probably because it's not a thriller, it's a mystery. But there is this really strong female friendship that blooms throughout the entire book that I thought was so much fun. It was so easy to root for like the two women at the forefront of the story. I think my main critique with everything is that there's some weird side romances going on. When I say side, they both have to do with Finlay. Like, she's in the middle of things. It distracted me a little bit from the mystery. Let's just have one man in here, okay, not two. It was really funny. I laughed out loud a lot reading this book, but it's not hard to make me laugh. Like, I laugh really easily, but I did think this was a funny one. I'm actually kind of scared for this next one. It's another 3.5-star rating. It's The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I know what you're thinking. Caroline, you just put out a video where you were like 70% of the way through this book and you raved about it. You told us how much you loved it, maybe even said it was a 5-star prediction. I am so sorry, you guys. I was wrong. I didn't have, that was on me. I was not correct. I feel like I'm about to open up an entire can of worms with this one. So this is a horror book that is also kind of a historical fiction book. I'm like nervous. It takes place in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's about this group of women in this uptight neighborhood. They start their own book club that focuses in on true crime books and thriller books and just things that they just shouldn't be reading in general, according to their husbands and according to society. So these aren't like other housewives, they're a little edgy. But then a vampire moves into their neighborhood and they invite him to join the book club without knowing that he's a vampire. This was a 5-star prediction from page 1 until about 90 to 100 pages remaining in the book. But I digress. There are a lot of things I really love about this, so let me start there. First of all, the characters in this book, A+. Anything having to do with the characters, the character arcs, their relationships to one another, anything where people are involved, perfect. I also really loved that Grady Hendrix was not trying to hide the fact that James Harris is a vampire to the readers. At first, like, I knew what this book was about going into it, so when he's introduced, I thought, oh my gosh, am I gonna have to sit here and pretend to forget that he's a vampire? No, he makes it very obvious right up front, and I really appreciated that. I also really liked the social commentary that was going on for like the first part of the book and also in the middle of the book, of these women standing up to gender norms and not being embarrassed in their interest in violence or in true crime or in just things that they're typically not supposed to be interested in. I really liked that, but then towards the end of the book, it kind of just started to get a little bit cheesy. I just wish that by the end of the book, things could have been a little more understated than, wow, look at me, a mere woman taking charge of my life. I can go to the grocery store and I can go toe-to-toe with a scary paranormal creature. Look at me go. It just made me a little sad because that is such a powerful message that I think would have hit home harder for me if it had been, like I said, a little more understated, maybe some like sprinkle some nuance in there. It was heavy-handed by the end. Also, I hate to say it, it was a little too long. It was just a little bit too long. That wraps up my thoughts for Grady Hendrix. I want to reiterate that he is one of the most creative authors that I've ever read from. I love Grady Hendrix and I will never stop reading from him. I feel like super critical every time I pick up one of his books. I can't explain it, but there's just something that will miss the mark by just this much every single time that prevents me from that 5-star rating. Maybe I'm holding myself back at this point. Is this self-sabotage? We don't know, but that's all for this one. What's next? Okay, we have 2 books left and both of them are 5 stars. Let's start with the second favorite book of May, Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne. Did y'all know that she is Australian? Because I did not. I learned that recently and it blew my mind. What if I'm wrong? Y'all, I have these really vivid dreams and I will straight up be lying to somebody at work, like telling them something, and it's just wrong. Like, it's actually just a dream that I had, and even though I have a really clear memory of it. But anyway, this is me telling you that I think she's Australian. First of all, it's a fun little contemporary slash kind of new adult, I guess it's not new adult. This is a little fun romance book. It's super cozy. It's not as steamy as The Hating Game. So when I say that I love this book, gave it 5 stars, I might actually prefer this over The Hating Game, which I never thought I would see the day where I said that. So Ruthie here, she manages this elderly neighborhood place where people, it's like a living community where the elderly live, and she works there and she has to live there as well. And she's really, I feel like I'm too far away. She's one of those girls that's just always played by the rules. I don't want to call her uptight, but she's more just kind of boring, kind of simple, kind of basic, which I relate to. She loves her routine, and then this guy named Teddy comes in and he just shakes everything up for her. I don't even know what trope this fits into, because for a second I thought it was gonna be enemies to lovers or grumpy sunshine, but it's not either of those things. Like, they don't get along for about 15-20 pages and then they're fine. Honestly, it's closer to friends to lovers than anything else, but if you know like what this trope specifically is called, please let me know in the comments. Teddy is just super easy to fall in love with. He's this tall guy, tattoos, long hair, really sweet, like unexpectedly so too. But the stars of this book are the old people. They are so perfect. Teddy starts working for these 2 elderly ladies, like as their personal assistant, and just the things they make him do and the way he just like grins and bears it and even like embraces it is so funny. This is another one that I laughed out loud throughout the entire book and then did cry my eyes out at the end. Like, it was just thing after thing. I couldn't get over it. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Second First Impressions. Easy 5 stars. And I meant to mention too, this is a pretty new release. I can't remember which month it came out, but it is like only a few months old. So this is the newest Sally Thorne. Okay, we have reached the end of the video, and my #1 favorite book from May is Penance by Kanae Minato. Thank you so much to Jess from Books Past Bedtime. She sent this book to me. It was so sweet. It was such a huge surprise, and when I got it in the mail, I was like, what is this? I didn't order any books. Oh my gosh, did I forget? What have I been doing on the internet? But no, thank you so much, Jess. I ripped open the package, saw this was the book that she sent me, sat on the couch, read the whole book. I could not put this book down. I have a ton of thoughts about it, so before I get into those, I do want to say that after hearing me talk about this book, if you feel interested in reading it, I would really highly recommend starting with Confessions by the same author, because I think the books are very similar in a lot of ways, and I just feel like more people will probably like Confessions more, and I can't really put my finger on why. But with that being said, if you have read Confessions and you did like Confessions, then I would recommend Penance. If you read Confessions and it wasn't for you, then I don't think you're gonna like Penance, because it is very much in that same vein. Let's get to talking about this one though. So yes, Penance is a thriller, but I really think above all else, it's just a character study. It's about these 5 12-year-old girls, and at the very beginning of the book, they're at this old pool slash playground thing, and this man comes up to them and takes one of the girls with him to like do this made-up task, and then the unthinkable happens and that girl is later found dead. So then that girl's mother here, she understandably just cannot get over it. So she talks to the girls who were there with her daughter that day, like pretty soon after all this happened. And she tells them that they each have to either find the killer before the 15-year limit runs out of the statute of limitations, which is what it was. That's like the number of years that they had to like find this guy and still charge him with the crime in Japan at that time. So they have like 15 years to make everything right, find him, whatever. Or they have to perform some sort of act of penance for what they've done. And if they don't do either, she's gonna come for them Ooh, so good. So this is a very short book. It has like 230 pages and it has 6 chapters. So the first 4 chapters are being told in the first person from each of the girls in the modern day. So they're what, like 27 now? This entire book is taking place 15 years after that crime. The first 4 chapters are told from the perspective of each of the girls and whether or not they have done this act of penance or if they are trying to like find the guy. It's just whatever's going on in their lives at this time. The 5th chapter is told from the perspective of the mother who has told them and like threatened them with all of this. And then the 6th chapter is just like a conclusion chapter. It's just called the final chapter. And I just have to say, one of the coolest things that Minato does in her writing, and she did this with Confessions as well, is that she has people telling the story in first person. So they're telling their own story, but they're, I'm so sorry. But they're never speaking to the reader directly. They're not just like talking for talking's sake. No. Everything is either a letter or someone giving a speech or someone inviting someone else into their home and talking to that person like one-on-one. They're just having these long monologues in these chapters in first person with like no dialogue. Like they're not talking back and forth. It's just genius, and it's so cool when you're gonna have a bunch of different narrators speaking in first person. It is such an easy way to look back and distinguish them from one another without giving them stereotypical personality traits. You can think back and be like, yes, she was the one who was a teacher who was giving a speech in front of a PTO group. Boom, done. That's burned in my mind. Who was say, oh yeah, she was the one who wrote the letter at the beginning of the book. Or who was this other one? Oh, she's the one who, you know, you see what I mean? It's very easy. But with that being said, each of these women also had these very distinctive and different backgrounds from one another and personality traits and different little characterizations that were not stereotypical. Every single one of them broke the mold to me. They were so different. They were just really cool characters. They were so unique to me, and I fell in love with every single one of them. I was rooting for every single one of them. I just love it that Minato will pick one simple little story. So for instance, what happened to her, this woman's daughter. We're gonna discuss it in chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, guess what? We're gonna discuss it again. We're gonna rehash some things, but it never feels repetitive. It just feels like this is the same situation, but now let's look at it from this angle. Let's add some new details in. And then like as the book goes, we're just getting more and more familiar with the crime. We're getting closer to the characters, and we feel like we're getting really close to solving what happened. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Minato also does this thing where she lets her characters give these super nonchalant deliveries of the most shocking news you've ever heard. And if you've read from her, you know what I mean. I'm like, let me think of, so this doesn't happen, but just as an example that I'm just making up, she could write, I walked into the grocery store and I went down the aisle that has all of the canned vegetables. I leaned over, grabbed a can, and realized that the prices are actually cheaper this week than they were last week. So with the can in my hand, I turned and began to beat the man standing next to me over the head with this can of green beans. That's what she does consistently, and every single time it cracks me up. And I'm not making light of the horrors. That was not dark. This woman goes dark, dark, dark with whatever shocking news it is. But it is so funny every time she's like, and then I killed so-and-so. Or then she's like, what? It just never gets old when they're just doing something mundane. And then it'll be like, and then I stabbed. Like, okay, I need to not be like laughing at this, but it is just, no one is doing it like that. It is so wild to me, and I'm really sad that now I've read the only 2 works by her that have been translated to English. I am so sad about that. I really hope for more in the future, because at this point, this is my favorite author. So even though I love this book, it's a super strong 5-star read for me. It's a contender for one of my favorite books by the end of the year. I do want to talk about just like a few little critiques that I can tell you in case you're really interested in reading it, and you might need to hear this to know like whether or not you're gonna like it. So first of all, like I said, it's a repetitive book, and to me, I feel like everything is really rewarding and that like we're getting new information, but it is a very simple premise that is rehashed over and over and over again. And then with the different characters narrating, yes, it was easy for me to distinguish everyone because of like how they were telling the story, and then also like their character traits and characteristics. But I will say they all do have pretty similar voices. Does that make sense? Like if one of them is just talking or I don't know, giving their speech or whatever, and I didn't know the context behind it, it could be anyone talking to me, and I don't know if that bothers anyone. Again, I think the characters are really easy to tell apart, but they are all kind of similar. And then also this book is pretty formulaic, if you hadn't put that together yet from what I've been saying about it. There's definitely a formula going on here of, okay, we're gonna hear this person's story, this person's story, this person's story, and then there was this pattern within each of the stories that I picked up on after, I think, the second or third chapter, to where from there on out, there were some things that were easy to predict within each chapter, but I had no idea where the story was going. I really didn't. But because the pattern is pretty easy to pick up on, it's easy to see where the main points of contention are going to occur within each story. That might not make any sense, but it will if you decide to pick this up and read it. Yeah, I loved Penance with all of my heart. I want to read more from her. I'm gonna have to learn Japanese. Oh my gosh, that's gonna be time consuming. All right, thank you so much for sticking around with me, for watching this video. Please let me know if you do like the wrap-ups being ranked like this, because it's really fun for me to do, but might not be for everybody, I don't know. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.